By the void, I spent way too much time on this. Hello everyone, I'm Limbo Fazframe, Servant of the Lotus, and we're back for part 2 of this whole Marky Yamamoto thing. So if you haven't seen part 1 yet, I suggest you do so now to get the full context of this rabbit hole I've gotten myself into. Anyway, today we're covering Marcus's rather lackluster response to Micromavi regarding her commentary on his response to Dulsmic. And with that, let's begin.
What? Nintendo most likely got it. He's saying that he doesn't like the fact that the title is just simply Spider-Man, because the only way to differentiate separate cartoon series with the same exact names as one another is to reference the year that it came out, especially now since there are 3 other Spider-Man animated series with that exact same title. Before we continue, I just need to point out something to Dulsmic. So, you do know that the 1994 Spider-Man cartoon is actually called Spider-Man the Animated Series, right? It does have its own title. I mean, sure, it's not plastered on the intro, but at least it's a title.
Okay, so say that was actually a point. That still leaves 2 other Spider-Man titles with the same name. And because you said that the animated series isn't plastered on the title, that would mean that the 1994 rendition would only be known to the masses as Spider-Man and not Spider-Man the Animated Series, thus still having to say the name of the year that it came out, especially since all of them are animated series. You'd still have to specify which one it would be no matter what, because you just end up being in this type of conversation.
Okay, then let's specify them right now. We'll call the 1967 one the Steve Ditko series because it uses the Ditko art style, and the 1981 series the John Romita Sr. because it uses Romita's style. And for the 1994 series, it's still called the animated series. I mean, even though it's not plastered on it, it's still called the animated series. Same thing with the 2017 series on Disney XD. It's still called Marvel Spider-Man. Even though it's not really called it, it's still called Marvel Spider-Man on some TV guides. Not to be confused with the PS4 game. I know it's called Marvel Spider-Man, but honestly, I prefer calling it Insomniac's Spider-Man, because Insomniac is treating this game as its own IP.
Well, there's a small problem with all this. What you prefer to call each series doesn't change the fact that the official titles for what you mentioned are simply Spider-Man. It's cool and all that they came up with unique names and all that, but that doesn't really debunk Mavi's point.
Now, whether or not they're exactly the same, I don't know, but I can see where he's coming from. Most people are aware of the Spider-Man origin story and are likely sick of constantly seeing it. This is a common complaint within Spider-Man media, especially when discussing the movies. It's the fact that people are so familiar with it that we don't exactly need to keep seeing it rebooted. That's what he's trying to say. Alright, after thinking about it, I think I have come to a conclusion to this. If I recall, this Spider-Man cartoon is supposed to be geared towards kids who don't know anything about Spider-Man. Thus, an origin story had to be presented. Nintendo and everyone else were probably acting like inconsiderate assholes because they have already seen the origin story too many times and didn't take into consideration that there might be people who don't know about Spidey's origin.
Alright, let's break this down. With so much media having to do with Spider-Man, kids could practically watch any of the other animated series, or even the movies in this case, and they'd be able to get the idea. It's very inconsiderate of you to think that kids can only understand this series explaining the backstories as opposed to the other series.
Well, you do have a point on what you just said. The thing is that trying to find these old cartoons is like trying to find a needle in a haystack. Case in point being the Steve Ditko and John Romita series. And I guess the Spider-Woman cartoon, but she's not technically part of Spider-Man's mythos, in a sense.
Surprisingly enough, I was able to find that you can indeed watch the old cartoons on Disney+. Or if you're okay with going the legally grey route, there are sites where you can stream almost all the cartoons for completely free, so they're far from finding a needle in a haystack.
Another thing is that some of these cartoons are kinda outdated at this point, like the animated series in Spectacular Spider-Man. That is why we need a new cartoon for this generation.
Unless the humor in their shows relies on either inside jokes or the current events of that time, it really shouldn't matter how old something is. Games like Devil May Cry 3 may be almost 15 years old at this point, but even today it's still a good game. Same goes for Spectacular Spider-Man. Sure, may be a decade old, but I doubt that show is so ancient or has aged so terribly that the children of our time won't be able to enjoy it or understand it.
Darkness imprisoning me! All that I see! Absolute Kaiso!
Dude, you have got to find a better way to structure these interjections. Hell, I have my own arguments that I can make against Nintendo's points, but I'll just save those for later. Regardless, that was just childish. Not just because of the weird content at the beginning, but with the comment that you made at the end, you just did not present yourself well at all. It's uncomfortable to just watch someone behave like this unironically. Alright, this dude probably has not watched the rest of my episodes, or didn't get the point of what I was trying to prove. A lot of comic book fans expect superhero stories to be gritty and serious, which is caused by DC's Dark Knight trilogy. Not every superhero has to be gritty and serious. Think about the children. Do you want them to be raised properly with sympathy and logical thinking? Or at the very least just act like a normal human being? Or do you want them to just act like an idiotic edgelord? Oh, great. Didn't think you'd come. Wait, I thought Chadwick killed you! Do you guys see this? Do you guys see this right now? Do you see what I have to deal with?
Or, you know, the parents could just parent and show the kid how to be a logical and sympathetic person themselves.
You serious?
When have parents ever been responsible? The answer was 2000. Nowadays, parents don't give a shit about their kids. Why are parents irresponsible? It's because they let their child roam free on the internet. In which case, they end up watching questionable videos that are not kid-friendly. Then they go out of their way to blame it on innocent YouTubers who have nothing to do with the video, and now we're stuck with some dumb rules.
Yeah, this random tirade is cool and all, but why does the Karens of the world getting upset over those Elsa and Spider-Man fetish videos have to do with the fact that cartoons shouldn't be the sole moral guide for children? Also, yeah, parents can be dumb sometimes, but they still ought to be the ones to teach their children important life lessons and not have cartoons and the internet do it for them.
My personal thoughts on parenting aside, no one expects superhero stories to be gritty and depressing. Yes, people do expect DC to be dark and gritty, but that's just because that's how they rose to popularity. That doesn't mean every one of their stories is going to end up that way.
Yeah, but every comic book fan is gonna expect every superhero story, regardless of what company and what media is being presented on other than comics, they're gonna expect superheroes to be gritty and serious as the main standard, the main expectation. All superheroes have to be gritty and serious.
I'm going to need something more empirical here than your word, Marcus. Because aside from Marvel's Netflix shows, edgy superhero media, namely Justice League and Batman v Superman, hasn't exactly been doing the best. And their movies with a more comedic edge to them have been doing much better, namely Shazam. So I don't know how you're coming to this conclusion.
Now, are you really going to expect superheroes to help children with logical thinking? They're superheroes. They're meant for fun. I mean, if there is a moral somewhere and the child can get something useful out of it, that's a side benefit, but that's not really the point here, now is it?
Mavi, this is Marvel we're talking about, not DC. Marvel always has to have a moral lesson within their stories.
That was never in dispute. She said that while comic books teaching morals is a benefit, it's not why a child would open the book.
Come on over here. Come on, coward. Coward! I'll beat your goddamn ass, you son of a bitch. You're an intellectual dumbass.
That's because your sense of humor is on the level of Batman. That has absolutely nothing to do with anything he just said. It has everything to do with what he just said, bonehead! This guy clearly favors DC over Marvel. If he's not gonna enjoy the jokes, then he shouldn't be watching a Marvel cartoon in the first place. If he wants to enjoy something great and serious, then he should be watching DC cartoons. End of story!
Okay, so y'all heard that, right? Oh? You didn't? You didn't hear Nintendo say or even imply a preference to DC over Marvel. Probably because he never said anything involving that. You know what could be implied, though? You jumping the gun during this entire thing, trying to spread this narrative that Nintendo is only critiquing this series because of some imaginary predetermined bias that you've conjured up in your mind.
Okay, I guess I have to explain this again, now that several years have gone by. So, you know about the Dark Knight trilogy and how gritty and serious it is? Well, a majority of DC films are following that formula of being gritty and serious. And because of that, comic book fans expect all superhero stories, regardless of what company and what media is being presented, they expect it to be gritty and serious. And in turn, this is affecting Marvel negatively in the stuff that they want to make and the message that they want to tell to their audience. I will admit, it is a bit of a theory, but I still believe with what I just said.
But how does this prove that Nintendo is one of these supposed DC edgelord fans? Like I said in part 1, he has mentioned nothing about DC in this review or any other prior to it. So this feels like a baseless accusation of yours because he criticized a show you like.
Oh, look at the little baby. And now look at the big baby. Wah.
Let's put in a hypothetical and said these are just minor critiques and he actually likes the show. You can dislike small aspects of a piece of media and still like it.
If they were minor critiques, then Nintendo would not be Carnage.
On what planet does criticizing a random cartoon being comparable to the actions of a symbiote-possessed serial killer make the slightest shred of sense? You are starting to sound crazier and more conspiratorial by the minute.
Yo, shit for brains! What goddamn color is this? Huh? You fucking blind motherfucker!
Says the person that doesn't read the comics. It doesn't matter what the comics have to do with these characters being portrayed the way they are. Are you aware that this is a common complaint within other Spider-Man properties?
Are you sure that's not some type of rumor? Or probably something that came out of a DC fan's ass?
Here you go again, implying more that the only reason that you made this initial response to Nintendo was made out of your own opinions of DC. You don't try to compare any of his out-of-ass claims to anything else but DC. You responding in the ways that you have in the initial videos become quite ironic because of this, saying that he should just watch DC if he wants to be gritty and serious. You know what? I'm surprised I never mentioned any of this.
What the fuck did I just say? DC Comics is altering people's perspective of superheroes to be gritty and serious. In turn, these people expect every superhero in existence to be gritty and serious.
Are you just so set in your ways that you can't think beyond anyone critical of my favorite show must be a stand of the rival corporation? You are proving Mavi's point right here and now. And again, if you seriously think Nintendo is one of these supposed DC fanboys, then give me more than your word.
A lot of the adults in particular don't have any diverse features. Probably because you're not an artist, you fuckhead. Oh, that's interesting. Now, take a look at this cake. It looks like shit, doesn't it? No, it just looks like leftovers from a kid's party. Oh wait, I'm not an experienced baker. Does that mean that I can't comment on how shitty this cake looks? Well, that's what you think. But what I think is that I'm gonna eat this cake for dessert because I'm just gonna appreciate what I have.
That's not how criticism works. Sure, what's dull to Nintendo ain't gonna be dull to you, obviously. But your point in the first video is about how, oh, you wouldn't know shit about the art because you're not an artist. Hi.
Hi, I'm Marcus, and I drew this with my bare hands.
What in the void does this prove? If you haven't noticed from our background footage, Mavi is also an artist. And judging from her work here so far, I think she has a bit more understanding of the medium than you do.
Asked by literally no one, I'm gonna give my own thoughts on the show's adult character designs and features. Now, given just how little I know about this show and little I've seen of it,
Wait, what? What the fuck? Why are you making this video if you haven't seen a majority of episodes? You don't even know if you're right or wrong!
Because she doesn't necessarily need to, if she's just going to talk about character design. Also, Having seen little of it still implies she has seen the show for herself. And unless there's some massive plot revelation later in the series that explains why the show looks the way it does, that little she has seen is all Maverick probably needs to critique it.
Just because you're used to your own crap doesn't mean people have to take your bullshit.
That may be true, but at least I learned to be sympathetic and forgive people. I know animation is hard. I know art is hard. I know that it's hard to animate. So that's why I'm like, okay, I get it. I know animation is hard. I know you can do better, so I'm gonna be patient and give you time.
Good on you. But when your show is currently owned by one of the big two comics publishers, which in itself is owned by a corporation with a net worth in the $100 billions, and has a monopoly on the animation industry, and it being a character from one of said comic book publishers' flagship books, expect people to expect more. Also, harsh criticism is still criticism, and the fact that animation can be difficult doesn't make your stuff above it.
Alright, so there's a few more issues to cover, so let's make this quick. So, for the Ratatouille reference, I did not imply that they would commit suicide if they failed. What I'm saying is that they would go out of business if they failed.
Marcus, did you even pay attention to what you said in that video?
Yes, I'm sure that could happen in the real world. It's not like if someone were to criticize someone's masterpiece that they would go into a deep depression and pretty much end it all. That would be ridiculous! Ratatouille!
Because the phrase, end it all, can't possibly mean to press Alt F4 on your own life, am I right? Especially if one mentions something about going into a deep depression beforehand. Marcus, if I were to describe watching these videos in one word, it would be tiresome. Throughout these videos, you made accusations of being DC edgelord fanboys against everyone that disagreed with you in these responses, missing the point of their arguments several times, made claims that have no evidence to support them beyond your word, and acting like an arrogant child. All I can say to you now is just learn not to jump the gun every time someone has a dissenting opinion of your favorite show, and assume they are DC fans trusting on the competition. They might actually like Spider-Man just as much as you do, but no, Marvel can do better. If you got this far in the video, thanks for watching. This is Limbo Fazframe, and I'll see you in the Rift.